Hey everyone, Sebastian from DC Spark here again, and this time I want to make a video talking about how projects decide where they should deploy their ecosystem. So you might have heard of some projects deploying as a layer 2, some projects deploying as a sidechain, some projects deploying as a fully separate layer 1, and you might not be sure why projects choose a specific path. And in this video, I hope to clarify this to you so you have a really good understanding of why projects choose a specific direction. Notably, there's a project in the Cardano ecosystem that just got announced that's a privacy sidechain. And one of the top comments I saw on cryptocurrency Reddit and Twitter was, why are they deploying as a sidechain and not as a layer 2 solution? And so I want to use this kind of as a case study, but I also want to talk a bit about Cosmos and Polkadot and some of these other ecosystems and their thoughts about this as well. And so let's get right into it. And what this really boils down to is a spectrum. And on one side, you have security, and on the other side, you have flexibility. Now, if you're launching a new project and you have some really ambitious goal in mind, usually you'll want to aim for as much flexibility as possible. However, this is actually really difficult because imagine you want to deploy a fully new project. You may not have enough validators to join your network to really bootstrap the safety of your cryptocurrency. Especially if you're thinking of something like a proof of stake network. If you run a proof of stake network and you're the only person who uses the cryptocurrency, then the safety is just relying entirely on you, which is not a very good safety property. There's other arguments to be made about, proof of work. So for example, if you spin up a new proof of work blockchain, unless you already have a lot of miners at your disposal, your proof of work blockchain will be instantly attacked by people trying to do 51% attacks. And we've seen this many times in the past. So how are projects tackling this? So we'll talk about Cardano in a little bit, but we'll start from the simplest approach and move towards more and more leveraging security from existing blockchains. So one thing you can do, which I kind of alluded to earlier, is you can build a fully custom layer 1 blockchain. So you build a whole new chain, you come up with your whole new set of validators, you restart from scratch. You're building an equivalent to Ethereum, an equivalent to Cardano, equivalent to Avalanche, Algorand, one of these layer 1 blockchains. And you might think, well, who's launching new full layer 1s nowadays? And actually, this is more common than you might think if you're not from certain ecosystems. But one really good example of this is the Cosmos ecosystem. So Cosmos has zones, which the Cosmos has SDKs for people to create their wholly new blockchains with it. You might be wondering, well, maybe I don't know of any Cosmos zone. Well, actually, there's probably a few that you do know. So, for example, Binance Chain leverages some of the Cosmos technology. Kronos leverages some of the Cosmos technology. Terra, also infamous blockchain, also leveraged some Cosmos technology. And there is probably over 100 projects at this point leveraging Cosmos. And they're using this to, instead of building the whole blockchain from scratch, using pre-built SDK components to bootstrap the ecosystem without having to rewrite, have the engineering cost of rewriting full blockchain from scratch. But you might be wondering, if they're just using the SDK, what is the value to the Cosmos ecosystem? Why is Cosmos providing these SDKs without getting anything in return? And this gets part into the Cosmos roadmap, which is not fully implemented. But the idea is that as people launch new layer 1 blockchains, they may not have enough security to deploy their validator set by themselves. So these Cosmos projects will go up to the Cosmos main chain, which uses Atom, and they would use Atom to pay for security from these validators. So they will go to the main chain and say, hey, I'm launching a new Cosmos zone. I need security. I'm willing to pay for it. Can you come download my blockchain SDK, run a node for me, and I'll pay you for that service. So that's the basic idea. And so you can see, even with launching a fully custom layer 1, there's still some people looking into ways to still get some flexibility, but leverage security from the Cosmos ecosystem. And so this is kind of an option. So using the case study we talked about at the start of this video, which is this privacy project for Cardano, this is one way they could have gone about it. They could have deployed a fully custom layer 1 with no connection to Cardano at all, but pay in ADA to Cardano validators to come over to the ecosystem and validate that chain. And we'll see why the option they picked is slightly more automatic than this kind of more manual approach, and hopefully it'll make sense in that direction. So another way you can go about this is to, and we're going to have to draw this out, is that if you have Cardano, you have the ADA network, which has a token. And you can create a new network that leverages the Cardano token, but does not leverage anything else from the Cardano ecosystem. And that's Milky Muta C1. So it uses its own security. So it has its own validator set, own security model, but same token. So the project decided not to have its own token, instead use the value of the Cardano token of ADA, and the value proposition is you still get all the flexibility you need, but you don't have to go through the effort of bootstrapping your own token with your own value, which is a hard thing to do. You have to get your token listed on exchanges, you have to have market makers, all this kind of stuff. And so this is kind of one option that some projects are pursuing, but not too common. Most projects don't go this direction. They often have their own token instead. But that's, the Milky Muta C1 project decided to go that direction. But one step higher is Ouroboros, which is Cardano's proof of stake implementation. And leveraging Ouroboros, you have the Cardano layer 1 blockchain. So what if you could have something kind of more automatic than what Cosmos has set up, where instead of having to get these Cosmos validators to go download your blockchain SDK, run in a kind of a manual process, what if you could have it more automated? And that's actually what Cardano is kind of aiming to do. So they're building a Sidechain SDK where Midnight, which is the name of their privacy sidechain, can basically leverage the Ouroboros SDK and automatically have a system to pay the Cardano validators, automatically have a system to have them sign up to be validators of the sidechain, and have an easier process for people to spin up sidechains and become validators for the sidechain. So it's a more automated process. The downside with the automated process is you also need automated rules to decide, how can we spin up these sidechains? Where's the security model for these sidechains? And one of the downside of this kind of system that they're using for Midnight is that it requires a certain percentage of the layer 1 validators to opt in to validating the sidechain. So for example, maybe 80% of Cardano stake pool flag that they will opt in to validating the Midnight network. And if this number ever drops below 80%, then you lose this bridging capability between the two chains. So it's a fairly high barrier to entry, right? Maybe IOG, which is the company who built both Midnight and Ouroboros, can pull it off because they have the reputation, they have the community. But if you, as a project, said, okay, well, I'm not, super convinced on the Cosmos model, and I want to instead leverage the security of the Cardano network, you may not be able to get, this 80% requirement or 50% requirement or whatever it ends up being to really get the enough security leverage from the layer 1. And so you can imagine in the future, you can have some dApp specific sidechains. And some example of some stuff like this that might come up is, maybe you want like a gaming sidechain for Cardano, and you want to still leverage some of the security of the Cardano network, so you want to adapt to the sidechain, but you may not be able to get 80% of the Cardano network to opt into validating your specific game, right? So this is still problematic. Now, one ecosystem that's been trying to take a slightly different approach to tackle this problem is Polkadot. Polkadot, as you may know, is also using Ouroboros to a certain extent. It's a project that's very much sharing some ideas is from the Cardano community. Cardano is in fact inspired by Polkadot in a sense on this model as well. And what they do instead of having to have 80% of the network opt in is they do an auction. So Polkadot has, maybe around 30 chains it validates, if you consider Kusama in as well. And some of these include Moonbeam, which you might know. There's some lesser known ones like Astar and a lot of, small projects you might not have heard of. And instead of having this system where 80% of the people have to flag support and that can spin up the sidechain, they have auctions. And so if you go to the Polkadot website, you can see which auctions are coming up. And they say, okay, we'll support, maybe 30 blockchains, and we'll validate these 30 blockchains. But these blockchains that want to be validated have to participate in an auction paying in DOT. Right? So instead of Atom like Cosmos, it's DOT, that's their main cryptocurrency. So they have to participate in this action using DOT. And if they win the auction, they get to be included as one of these 30 chains. And once you win the auction, it's not forever. You win the auction for, I think, a year or two, something in that range. But you may have to reapply in the future. But this is fine because a lot of these projects want to leverage the security of the Polkadot network and, still get some flexibility. And as they build some of their own security themselves, they build, reputation, they build their technology, they may eventually be able to spin off and become their own separate layer 1 blockchains. One of the problems with the system of Polkadot, and you'll notice this also extends to the system that Cardano is working on, is that you're not just sharing CPU usage, you're also sharing data usage as well. So the validators of the Cardano network, the validators of Ouroboros right here, who are validating the Cardano layer 1, have a finite amount of computational resources available to them, right? And so if they're validating Cardano and they're validating Midnight and they're validating your dApp specific project, there's at some point where they'll run out of kind of computational resources required to maintain this. Now, Cardano is slightly more flexible than the Polkadot system, but this really affects Polkadot because they mean all these chains that win at the auction have to share between them these computational requirements, notably CPU usage has to be shared to a certain extent. And they have a whole bunch of ways to try and get around this, but that's why the auctions are limited. This is not like an auction where there's an infinite amount of parachains that can be supported by the Polkadot network. Rather, they have a specific set amount of slots available, and they have to auction these because there's a finite computation resource, and people have to bid for access to this resource. And Cardano may end up being in a similar situation where a lot of these layer 1 validators of the Cardano network may decide, well, actually, I'm already supporting multiple sidechains, and I don't have the mental bandwidth or the computational bandwidth or whatever to really take on more sidechain projects. So this is a limiting factor. So, okay, so we talked about, deploying your own layer 1. That's an option. We talked about deploying, a sidechain that just leverages the token of existing ecosystem. We talked about leveraging the layer 1 validator CPU usage and data usage. But there's other options as well. So if neither of those sound like something that matches for your project, you can look at, how Cardano's smart contracts work, which they have a smart contract system called Plutus. And you can deploy your application directly to Cardano, just like you can deploy a Sleek application directly to Ethereum. So another option you have is that you just deploy your dApp directly to Cardano. Now, on the flexibility side, you get basically very little flexibility because now you have to write your smart contract using Cardano's programming language. You're limited by Cardano's layer 1 proof of stake model, which has probabilistic finality, and it also has around 20 seconds block times. And for some lot of projects, this is good enough, but for some specific projects, for example, like the game application we talked about, these two properties are maybe not what you want, and so you may not exactly be happy with the loss of flexibility you get from deploying directly to Cardano, but you might require this anyways because you require the security. So this is definitely a trade-off a lot of projects make. But what if you want something slightly more than Plutus? Because with Plutus you get a lot of security, but as I mentioned, there's some downsides. And one of the main downsides I haven't mentioned yet is that you're paying for data and you're paying for CPU, right? And the reason you're paying for data and CPU is because all your application state is stored on the Cardano network. I should say there's a caveat of how Cardano handles data. You can find another video about from me about this topic. But anyways, you're storing a certain amount of data on the Cardano network, and also everything you do is required to be executed by Cardano Layer 1 validators, so you're paying for the CPU usage as well, which is kind of the same trade-off you had in this other section over here. So this means that running your dApp, although you get a lot of security, you're also paying a lot of money to the Cardano network to leverage the security, which might not be exactly what you want. So another option you have, so let's call this option number 2, is to use a known layer 2 solution. So Cardano doesn't currently have any layer 2 solutions that are in production at the moment. I have another video on my channel that talks about why that is, or maybe it's not on my channel, but I'll link in the description. It's actually from a different conference, so it's not on the DC Spark channel, but I'll link in the description. It talks about why Cardano doesn't have a layer 2 yet, what technological barriers exist, but there's people working on this solution in a variety of ways, from Hydra, from Milky Meetup, and other projects as well. But anyways, so you can imagine maybe this is the Ethereum ecosystem where they already have Optimism, they already have Arbitrum, they already have ZK Sync, they already have these existing layer 2 solutions, and your dApp can leverage a known layer 2. So with this, you get a little less security, a little less flexibility, because now you're bound by whatever trade-offs the layer 2 made. So for example, Optimism is known for having a fairly long period to get off the layer 2. So if you want to go from layer 2 to layer 1, you usually have to wait like a week or so, something like that, if I remember correctly. So you lose some flexibility because this might not be the user experience that you need for your specific application, but you get some benefit of reusing security, not just from Cardano or Ethereum in this case, because the way layers 2 work is that they eventually settle on the layer 1 blockchain, but you also leverage security from the Optimism team, for example, for Ethereum. So if you're deploying to Optimism, then once they decentralize their sequencer and they have a whole system for this, you're leveraging the security model that they've put in place, and you don't have to spin up your own system. But more and more, we see projects talking about an option 3, which is a dApp-specific layer 2. So you may look at Optimism, Arbitrum, ZK Sync, and you may not like the trade-offs they made. So you can make your own dApp-specific layer 2, and then your dApp lives over here. And now you get more flexibility again, because you can have a layer 2 specifically customized for your specific use case, but you still leverage some security, because at the end of the day, you're taking the security from either the Cardano network or the Ethereum network or wherever your network plans to be deployed to. And you may not know of any projects thinking about these dApp-specific rollups, and I know there's a few of them that are kind of maybe under the radar at the moment. One of them I definitely do know is Pima Studios, which is deploying a layer 2 solution as a game engine. So if you want to see an example of, I wouldn't necessarily call it a dApp-specific rollup in exactly the same way, but a project that's deploying a layer 2 for a very specific use case, which is gaming. So it's kind of close to option 3. So through this video, hopefully you got an idea of the different options for how you can deploy a project on a blockchain, and the different trade-offs in security and flexibility you get from these ones. You can think about, some examples like in the past when Elon Musk announced he was buying Twitter, people were talking about, he should move Twitter to the blockchain, have Twitter run on the blockchain. And you saw a lot of blockchain ecosystems say like, Twitter should run on Ethereum, Twitter should run on Cosmos, Twitter should run on Polkadot, Twitter should run on Cardano. And you've seen different proposals by different projects trying to convince Twitter to come over. And these projects, as you've seen in this video, have fairly different ways for how projects come over, have fairly different ways for how they leverage security. And so if you think of Twitter, for example, they have a very big following. They have a lot of known users. They have a lot of people who would be interested in validating any kind of Twitter network. So most likely, Twitter would focus on flexibility because they have enough network effect to leverage their own security network and not have to pay off, Cosmos validators or Polkadot validators or Cardano validators or Ethereum validators. They probably have enough network effect to build their own ecosystem and attract people there. So this is maybe another case example separate from Midnight that we talked about earlier of how people might be thinking about this project. So hopefully you thought this was interesting. I have a lot more videos on similar topics. I'll link them in the YouTube description below. But if you like those, definitely check them out and follow us on YouTube and Twitter for more informational videos in the future. Thank you.